نملأ درب العلم ونعمل
أحبك يا أحمد المصطفى تبارك ربي فما أشرفا أحبك والكون فيه سكون كوجه الغدير إذا ما صفا أحبك يا أحمد المصطفى وإن هاج يوم وزام جررا وازبهد موج وطال عفا ففيك ذكري إذا ما خلوت وبنى حبيب وخيل الجفا وفيك اعتباري وسط الجموع فمنك تعلمت حسن الوفاء ومهما تضلع من غيث حبك قلبي فما زاد أو أسرفا أحبك يا أحمد المصطفى وما من رؤوم وإن أشفقت بأرحام منك ولا أرأفا ألست الكريم الحليم الذي إذا ما أسيء إليه عفا ألست الإمام لدى المرسلين براقك بالكون قد طوفا أغالب فيك فؤادا شغوفا بحبك يرجو بأن يشرفا أحبك يا أحمد المصطفى ودمعا سفوحا على الوجنتين إذا مر طيف
من لا يفرج كربا بات يضنينا.
Sabah Muslim is proudly sponsored by Shiraz Auto. For all your Mercedes-Benz sales, service and parts requirements, call Shiraz Auto on 011 213 1100 or visit our website at shirazauto.co.za.
Well, up next, the Middle East Report.
Middle East Report on Sabah Muslim.
That's right, the Middle East Report. Joining us, James Dorsey, Senior Fellow at the Singapore's Esa Rajaratnam School of International Studies and Middle East Institute. Good morning or good day to you, James.
Good morning and Ramadan Kareem.
And thank you for the greetings, James. Of the discussion, Saudi Arabia having reduced by 30% its U.S. Treasury bill holdings. Now, this is at a time of some strained relations between Washington and Riyadh. One would think that, during the early days of MBS and Donald Trump, it was a house on fire. It seems not so much in the current climate. Talk to us.
I think that's exactly the point. The Saudis over the last 2 years have reduced their holdings in treasury bonds by 36.7%. And that's quite considerable given that the United States relies in part on foreign holdings of treasury bonds to fund its deficits. Relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia are strained over multiple issues, including, at least until recently, President Biden's refusal to deal directly with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman because of the 2018 killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. They're strained over oil prices in the wake of and oil production in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And they're strained in terms of both U.S. efforts to revive the Iran nuclear agreement, as well as perceived lack of robustness in the U.S. response in defense of the kingdom against attacks by Iran on oil facilities.
James, Israel also coming to the picture here, lobbying Washington for the inclusion of defense treaties with both Saudi Arabia and UAE. What's Israel's lobbying game over here? I mean, do they seek some long-term strategic plan with both?
Well, I think that clearly the UAE and Israel have a blossoming security relationship, certainly blossoming even more than it existed prior to the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries 2 years ago. Saudi Arabia and Israel have a long-standing relationship, but that relationship is much more covert and has not been formalized. The Israeli attitude is indeed interesting or striking, if you wish. If you go back several decades, Israel was lobbying against Saudi Arabia and the United States. Now it's lobbying in favor. One of the things that the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, want from the United States going forward is a defense treaty. And that is, so with other words, the United States does not have a NATO-style agreement with any Gulf state, NATO-style meaning that the defense on one country is an attack on one country is an attack on the other, and therefore one comes to each other's aid by definition. The Saudis and the Emiratis are really dependent on what the wind in Washington is at any given moment, and that they want to remove by coming to a defense agreement.
We've also seen, James, over the last couple of days that the UAE airlines, at least two that I know, that's Etihad and what's that, Wizz Airlines or some sort, cancelling, in protest of clashes on the Haram Sharif. And this is cancelling their participation in a celebratory flyover. This is Israel's Independence Day, where a number of airlines were to join their Israeli counterparts in flying over the country in a show of some solidarity. What's happening here? I mean, could one have expected this, especially over clashes that we saw in Al-Aqsa Haram Sharif in the last few days?
I think it's of only symbolic value, or importance, but nonetheless, it is important in that sense. So you have these blossoming relationships. The UAE has touted its establishment of diplomatic relations, not exclusively, but also as a ways of trying to promote an Israeli-Palestinian, a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Obviously, that has not happened. The UAE has not been very convincing in trying to project efforts to resolve the conflict. So pulling out of the Independence Day flyover because of what is happening on the Haram al-Sharif, or the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, has indeed significant symbolic value, and in some ways maybe a shot across Israel's bow.
Finally, James, we've seen Putin putting some pressure on Israel. Is Israel initially in not condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but having, said something with regards to the condemnation of Russian war crimes in Ukraine in the last, few days. Putin weighing in, and what's his claim that, Israel should mind its own business, or what?
Well, the Israelis have been walking, like others in the Middle East and elsewhere, have been walking a fine line. So they have condemned the invasion. They have voted in favor of UN resolutions, but they have not they have not enforced sanctions. And they've been basically able to do so because they were playing a mediating role. Now, increasingly, there seems to be less space for mediation, so that it's becoming tougher for the Israelis to defend their position. But on the other hand, they have interests with the Russians, particularly in Syria, as well as in Jerusalem itself. And so when the Israeli foreign minister, Yair Lapid, recently went further in statements than Israel has done in the past, and has condemned Russia for war crimes in Ukraine. Russia retaliated by announcing that a Russian-made missile had stymied an attack by an Israeli warplane in Syria against Iranian targets. That was the first time that the Russians have pointed out that it was a Russian missile that took down or prevented an Israeli missile. You also had at the same time a phone call between Putin and the Palestinian president Mahmoud Abbas, in which Putin expressed support for the Palestinians in the clashes in Jerusalem. And Putin is stepping up pressure on Israel to hand over a Russian church in Jerusalem, in the Old City.